Welcome to Infinite Universe with new interesting episode. It was a very difficult time for me because I loved watching the Andy Griffith Show so much. Don Knotts made America laugh, but his own life was filled with sadness. Behind all the fun he brought to the screen, he carried deep emotional wounds. He grew up in a house filled with fear, pain, and trauma. His father was a violent alcoholic who often threatened him with a knife. These terrible experiences stayed with him for his whole life. Even after he became famous and won 5 Emmy Awards, Don struggled with panic attacks that made it hard for him to function. In his final years, things got even harder as he began to go blind because of a condition called macular degeneration. Then, he was diagnosed with lung cancer, which eventually ended his life. This is the heartbreaking story of a man who brought joy to millions but found very little happiness in his own life. Don Knotts was born in Morgantown, West Virginia, in 1924. He came into the world 14 years after his next oldest sibling. His parents hadn't planned on having another child. His mother was already 40 years old when he was born, and his father was struggling to support the family. They had just lost their farm, and life was full of hardship. There was no money, no comfort, and definitely no room for a new baby. Don had to sleep on a small cot in the kitchen, while his older brothers shared a room with strangers who paid rent to help the family survive. There was no privacy and no peace, just stress and the constant reminder that they were barely getting by. Don was a small and sickly child. He had to wear old clothes that didn't fit properly. Other kids at school made fun of him. But things were even worse at home. His father William was almost completely blind, he drank too much, and he suffered from mental illness. Most days, he would lie on the couch, moody and unpredictable. Don had to walk past him just to leave the house, never knowing if he would be calm or violent. Sometimes, his father would grab a knife and threaten Don. He lived in constant fear. Don once said, "I felt like a loser. I was unhappy most of the time." When Don was 13 years old, his father died from pneumonia. It was a sad event, but Don felt like a huge weight had been lifted off his chest. Still, the fear didn't completely disappear. His older brothers, who had grown up during better times, had become bitter and angry. They drank too much and fought often, sometimes taking out their frustrations on Don. They saw him as weak and worthless. But there was one brother who treated him kindly. His nickname was Shadow. Shadow liked to tease and joke around, and he brought some light into Don's dark world. When Shadow died from an asthma attack, Don lost the only family member who had ever made him laugh or feel seen. With no one left to trust or rely on, Don started escaping into his imagination. He made up stories and created imaginary friends. That's how he survived the loneliness and fear. One day, he discovered ventriloquism. He built a puppet named Danny and started performing at schools, churches, and community centers. He was only 15 years old. Performing wasn't just a hobby, it was his escape. For the first time in his life, people clapped for him. Not for his brothers. Not for the dummy. For him. He eventually tried his luck in New York, hoping to break into show business, but things didn't work out. He returned home and enrolled at West Virginia University. Then came World War II. In 1943, when Don was 19, he was drafted into the military. A common myth says he became a Marine drill instructor, but that wasn't true. Don wasn't made for combat. He was too skinny and too nervous. The Army assigned him to the 6,817th Special Services Battalion, where his job was to entertain the troops. While overseas, Don performed in a show called Stars and Gripes, traveling from island to lift the soldiers' spirits. At first, he performed with his dummy, Danny Hooch Matador. Don had been using ventriloquism since he was a kid, but after 2 years, something changed. He started feeling annoyed that the puppet was getting more laughs than he was. It was his act, but the dummy always stole the spotlight. His fellow performer Al Checo noticed it too. Don was tired of being second to a wooden doll. Then, something dramatic happened. In 1945, while sailing back to the United States, Don picked up the dummy and threw it into the ocean. He later said he imagined the dummy screaming as it sank, like it was alive. But he didn't regret it. That moment was like breaking free from chains. He was done hiding behind a puppet. From now on, he would make people laugh as himself. In January 1946, Don returned to West Virginia University. Thanks to the GI Bill, he could finish his education. He studied theater and acted in campus plays, gradually developing the nervous, jumpy character that would later become his signature style. This time, it was all him, no dummy. People started to take notice. During his time at school, he met a woman named Catherine Metz. She was calm and thoughtful, the opposite of Don. She was already engaged to someone else, but Don didn't give up. He pursued her, and somehow, he won her heart. They got married in 1948, the same year Don earned his theater degree. Don left West Virginia that year with a dream and a $100 loan. He was only 24 years old. He took a bus to New York City, hoping that his experience entertaining troops during the war would help him find work. But New York didn't care. He went to audition after audition and was mostly ignored. Casting directors didn't know what to do with a skinny, nervous guy from a small town. Meanwhile, he and Catherine were newly married, and the bills were piling up. Don was starting to lose confidence. But then, something happened. Some of his old military contacts helped him get small acting jobs. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. In 1953, he landed a role on a national TV soap opera called Search for Tomorrow. This was a turning point. He played a nervous, traumatized man named Wilbur Peterson, who could barely talk to anyone except his sister. To play the role, Don had to dig deep into his own past, the fear, the sadness, the loneliness. He didn't back away from the challenge. Over the next 2 years, he appeared in about 500 episodes. No matter how anxious or tired he felt, he kept showing up. This role helped casting directors see that he was serious, and it eventually opened the door to Broadway. That same year, Don also landed a small role on Howdy Doody, a popular children's TV show watched by millions. He played a twitchy, funny character named Tim Tremble. The role made kids laugh, but more importantly, it made adults pay attention. Don's anxious energy was something new, and it worked. What started as a silly children's show role became the testing ground for the character that would later make him famous. But behind the scenes, Don was struggling. He suffered from extreme health anxiety. Even when doctors told him he was fine, he constantly worried he had some deadly illness. He often woke up convinced he was dying. His body reacted to his fear with panic attacks, trembling, and stomach problems. To calm his nerves, doctors gave him barbiturates and early tranquilizers. That was common in the 1950s. Soon, Don couldn't perform without them. He was filming both Search for Tomorrow and Howdy Doody at the same time. Audiences laughed, but he was falling apart inside. Sometimes he forgot his lines. Sometimes he didn't seem like himself. Directors noticed, but they found ways to work around it. Don always delivered when the cameras were rolling, but the drugs dulled his mind and made his moods unstable. In 1956, Don's luck changed again. He joined The Steve Allen Show, and the nervous, shaky character he had created started to catch on with viewers. This wasn't just a random creation. Don once saw a man shaking so badly at a banquet that he spilled water all over himself. That image stayed in Don's mind. Years later, he dreamed about it, woke up, wrote down a comedy routine, and it became a hit. Between 1956 and 1959, Don appeared on The Steve Allen Show regularly, gaining national attention. Then came another big opportunity. In 1955, Don had been cast in a Broadway play called No Time for Sergeants. That's where he met Andy Griffith. Don had a small role, but he and Andy clicked. Their chemistry was real, even if they didn't have many scenes together. In 1958, they reprised their roles in the movie version of the play. The film made over $7.6 million, a huge success. On set, Don and Andy bonded even more. Don was learning how to be funny by being subtle. That nervous wreck who thinks his in-control idea would soon become his trademark. Then, one night in 1960, everything changed. Don was at home watching TV when he saw Andy Griffith playing a sheriff in a small town on The Danny Thomas Show. It was the pilot for what would become The Andy Griffith Show. Don saw something special, and he knew he had. to be a part of it. The next day, Don called Andy and said, "You need a deputy." Andy agreed immediately. That moment launched one of the most iconic duos in television history. When Don stepped into the role of Barney Fife, everything came together. He played the character with nervous energy, exaggerated confidence, and deep insecurity. Barney was funny because he tried to act tough, but he was really fragile inside. Don didn't just act, he drew on his entire life experience to bring Barney to life. He knew what fear felt like, what it meant to be unsure of yourself, and how to hide pain behind a smile. The audience loved it. His performance was so powerful that he won 5 Emmy Awards for Outstanding Supporting Actor in a Comedy Series. Barney Fife became a household name, and Don became a legend. Despite the fame and awards, Don remained humble and unsure of himself. He always worried about doing a good job. He never felt like a star. Even when people praised him, he struggled to believe them. His health anxiety never went away. He continued to take medications just to get through the day. But he kept going because making people laugh gave his life meaning. In 1965, after 5 seasons, Don made a tough decision. He left the Andy Griffith Show. At the time, he believed the show was ending, and he had to look for other work. But the show continued without him. Many fans were heartbroken. Don went on to star in several Disney films like The Incredible Mr. Limpet, The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, and The Apple Dumpling Gang. These films were successful and helped Don stay in the spotlight, but none of them matched the magic of Barney Fife. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Don kept working in TV and film. He reunited with Andy Griffith in several TV movies, and the two remained close friends for the rest of their lives. Don also found new audiences as Mr. Furley on Three's Company. Again, he played a character who was funny, clueless, and full of misplaced confidence. He knew how to take awkwardness and turn it into comedy gold. But while his career had high points, Don's personal life was never easy. His marriage to Catherine ended in divorce in 1964. He later married again, but that relationship also ended. He had 2 children, but his mental health struggles often kept him emotionally distant. He was always nervous, always afraid, always unsure of himself. He suffered in silence, hiding behind his jokes and funny voices. As Don got older, his body began to fail. He was diagnosed with macular degeneration, which slowly robbed him of his eyesight. For someone who relied on reading scripts and memorizing lines, this was devastating. He also developed cancer, a battle he tried to keep private. In 2006, at the age of 81, Don Knotts passed away. He died surrounded by his family and close friends, including Andy Griffith, who later said, "He was one of the funniest men I ever worked with, and one of the kindest." Don Knotts spent his life making others laugh, even when he felt like crying. He created characters that will never be forgotten, especially Barney Fife, a role so iconic that no one has ever come close to matching it. But behind the laughter was a man shaped by trauma, fear, and sadness. He never found peace, not really. But he gave the world a gift, laughter that could make even the darkest days feel a little brighter. His story reminds us that the people who bring us the most joy often carry the heaviest burdens. Don Knotts made the world laugh, even when his own world was filled with pain. And in doing so, he gave his life meaning through every shaky line, every wide-eyed stare, and every awkward pause. He turned his fears into comedy, and in that transformation, he became more than a comedian. He became a legend. This was the story of Don Knotts, a man whose soul was bruised by life but whose spirit kept pushing forward. He taught us that it's okay to be vulnerable, okay to be afraid, and that even the most fragile among us can leave a powerful legacy. His performances live on, and so does the laughter he gave us. And maybe, just maybe, that was all he ever wanted, to make us laugh so that we wouldn't feel the same pain he once did. Don Knotts hadn't spoken to Andy Griffith in almost 3 years, but one day, he picked up the phone and called him. There was no plan, no agent arranging a meeting, no formal audition. Don just had a feeling. He said, "Don't you think Sheriff Andy Taylor should have a deputy?" It was a bold idea, just a cold call with a crazy suggestion. But Andy didn't laugh it off. In fact, he loved it. He quickly arranged a meeting with the show's producer, Sheldon Leonard. At the same time, Don's job with Steve Allen's show was coming to an end. The timing couldn't have been better. Within just a few weeks, Don was officially hired for the role. That's when the world was introduced to Barney Fife. Many people thought Barney Fife was just Don doing his usual nervous, shaky act, like he had done before. But that wasn't true. Don carefully created Barney as a completely new character. Yes, Barney was nervous and jumpy, but he wasn't just scared. He was also loud, proud, and full of himself. He acted like he knew everything about being a lawman, but in reality, he didn't know much at all. That funny contrast, being confident but clueless, was what made Barney so entertaining. Originally, the writers thought Andy would be the funny one and Don would be the serious partner. But that changed very quickly. By the second episode, Andy noticed something special in Don's performance. Andy told the writers, "Don should be the funny one. I'll play it straight." That decision flipped the entire dynamic of the show and helped it become the classic we know today. Don poured his whole heart into creating Barney Fife. Everything about the character was thought through: the way he spoke, the way he walked, how he always kept just one bullet in his shirt pocket, and even how he would argue with his girlfriend Thelma Lou or annoy Andy. Don worked hard to make sure every detail felt real and funny. He turned what could have been a goofy sidekick into one of the most memorable TV characters of all time. Audiences fell in love with Barney Fife. And so did the critics. From 1961 to 1963, Don Knotts won 3 Emmy Awards in a row, not for being the lead actor, but for being the best supporting actor. Even though his role was supporting, many people believed he had become the heart of the entire show. His wide eyes, shaky voice, and over-the-top reactions were unforgettable. Whenever something went wrong in Mayberry, Barney's reaction made it 10 times funnier. One of the most famous things about Barney was that he wasn't trusted to carry a loaded gun. Andy made him keep a single bullet in his pocket. Even then, Barney would often somehow shoot the ceiling by accident. Every time that happened, he'd look heartbroken, hand over his gun like a guilty child, and slowly walk away. That kind of physical comedy didn't need dialogue, it was pure and timeless, and Don pulled it off perfectly. But Barney wasn't just a clown. He truly believed he was an expert in everything, from judo and singing to American history. He would puff up his chest, act like he knew it all, and then fall apart when things didn't go his way. His singing was usually a disaster when he tried too hard, but when he sang quietly with Andy, just the two of them, it was unexpectedly sweet. Don played both the funny and touching sides of Barney like a true professional. Then came a big surprise. In 1965, Don decided to leave the show, even though he was at the peak of his popularity. He had been told by Andy that the show would end after 5 seasons. So, Don made a smart career move. He signed a 5-picture movie deal with Universal Studios. But then, Andy changed his mind and decided to keep the show going. By that time, Don had already signed the movie contract and couldn't get out of it. He was heartbroken. He didn't want to leave the show, but he had no choice. To explain Barney's exit, the writers said he had taken a new job in Raleigh, a promotion in a big city. The show continued until 1968, but many fans felt that something important was missing without Don. He was truly irreplaceable. In 1966 and 1967, Don returned for a few guest appearances. When he walked back onto the set of Mayberry, it felt like he had never left. He slipped right back into the role, and audiences were thrilled to see him again. Those few episodes were so powerful that he won 2 more Emmy Awards for them. That brought his total to 5 Emmys for one single character, Barney Fife. No other comedy supporting actor has matched that record. Years later, in 1986, Don put on the deputy badge one last time for a reunion movie called Return to Mayberry. The whole cast came back, older and slower, but still full of that old magic. When Barney walked back on screen, it felt like time had stood still. Back in 1964, around the time he was finishing with the Andy Griffith Show, Don took a chance on something completely different. He starred in a strange movie called The Incredible Mr. Limpet. It was half live action and half animation. Don played a shy man who loved fish so much that he turned into one and ended up helping the Navy hunt Nazi submarines. It sounded ridiculous, but somehow it worked. The movie didn't become a blockbuster, but it made around $35.7 million in today's money, and more importantly, it proved that Don could carry a movie all by himself. That same year, believing the Andy Griffith Show was ending, he signed a 5-film deal with Universal. Of course, the show didn't end, but Don couldn't turn back. So, he moved into movies full-time. His first film under Universal was The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, released in 1966. It was a low-budget film that ended up making over $100 million when adjusted for inflation. That success led Universal to lock him in for 5 years. In 1967, he starred in The Reluctant Astronaut, where he played a man afraid of heights who accidentally gets pulled into the space program. It used real NASA footage and was released just 2 days before the tragic Apollo 1 fire, which hurt its success. In 1968, he returned in The Shakiest Gun in the West, a remake of an old Bob Hope film. It wasn't a huge hit, but it did well enough. Don was especially loved in smaller towns and the South, while big city critics often ignored him. But no matter what, audiences kept showing up. Then, in 1969, he tried something completely different. In The Love God, he played a man who unexpectedly becomes the head of an adult magazine. It was a strange role and didn't sit well with audiences. The film flopped, earning only about $15.4 million adjusted for inflation. Don had tried to change his image, but it didn't work. By 1971, he wrapped up his Universal contract with How to Frame a Fig, which also underperformed. Hollywood was changing. Edgy movies like The Graduate and Easy Rider were taking over, and Don's clean, slapstick humor didn't fit in with the new trends. He was 47, and his movie career was slowing down. He didn't know what was next. But Don wasn't finished. In 1979, the popular sitcom Three's Company needed a new character. The landlords were leaving for a spin-off, and producers brought in Don as Ralph Furley, a flashy, over-the-top building manager. At first, the cast was nervous. John Ritter later admitted that they were scared of Don because he was already such a big star. But Don immediately brought something magical to the show. Ralph Furley thought he was smooth with the ladies, but he never got it right. He wore wild suits, big collars, and loud colors. His fashion sense was as loud as his personality. But that made it hilarious. Don used his body like a cartoon character. His facial expressions alone could get a laugh. When Suzanne Summers left the show in 1981, the writers gave more lines and jokes to Don. His character became even more central, and he stayed with the show until it ended in 1984. Even after Three's Company, Don kept working. In 1987, he played a school principal on another sitcom. The following year, he joined Matlock, reuniting with Andy Griffith, and fans loved seeing them together again. He also did voice work, including appearing in animated Scooby-Doo shows, sometimes even playing a cartoon version of himself. He even had his own variety show in 1970 and guest-starred in many other popular shows. But behind the laughter, Don's real life was filled with pain. His childhood was deeply troubled. His father, Jesse, had serious mental health issues and drank heavily. He was violent, even threatening Don's life. Don's mother once reminded him, "Do you remember when your father held a knife to your throat while you were still in diapers?" Jesse was sent to a mental hospital twice and died when Don was just 13. Only after that did Don begin to feel free and started using humor to cope. Even as an adult, Don struggled with self-worth. His daughter Karen said he had many moods and battled depression. He felt like a loser, even after winning awards and earning fame. He once told a reporter, "I felt like a loser. I was unhappy most of the time. We were poor, and I hated my size." His brother-in-law said Don never felt good enough, no matter how successful he became. In 1979, while riding high on the success of Three's Company, Don got devastating news. At just 57, he was going blind. He had macular degeneration and couldn't read scripts properly. He struggled to recognize people's faces. Driving became unsafe. For a man known for his big, expressive eyes, it was terrifying. Don kept his condition secret, but he was crumbling inside. His wife Laura Lee said he became obsessed with doing everything he could before losing his sight completely. He fell into depression. His daughter Karen said he would lock himself in his dressing room, stay in bed for days, and panic before scenes. His worsening vision made his anxiety even worse. Then, around 1982, a new type of surgery gave Don hope. It was risky, but it helped. His vision didn't return fully, but it improved enough for him to keep working. He smiled more and even joked again. He told the New York Times that a blind man would trade everything to see as well as he still could. But the damage to his life had already taken a toll. His marriage didn't survive. Laura Lee, his second wife, had been patient for years, but by 1983, she said Don had changed so much that he wasn't the same man anymore. The pressure, health problems, and fear had overwhelmed him. Still, Don Knotts kept going. Despite his struggles, he gave the world laughter, warmth, and unforgettable characters. Behind his famous smile was a man who had suffered deeply, yet still found a way to bring joy to millions. His legacy lives on not just through the awards and shows, but in every smile and laugh he gave to people who needed it most. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe our channel. Have a good day.